Good afternoon, everybody. Mike Winkler here, and I want to take a minute and talk about learning more from the data you have, right? So QRadar and Resilient are really wonderful tools, but we tend to use them on the same data again and again, and we get good results, but we don't get like the best results. So, and I'm recording this during the midst of the COVID-19 outbreak, and some of these were brought to mind by what's going on with the kind of quarantining and the health concerns that we have right now. So let's dig in and let's look at some of the ways we can use data that maybe you hadn't thought of before. Okay, so we have a ton of good data, right? We have all of the good things we have put into QRadar since the beginning of time, right? These are things that come from your network, from your cloud, they come from threat feeds, on and on. There is a ton of good data that we use, and this gives us a really, really good view of our security intelligence, right? The problem is there is a ton of good data that we don't use. Things that are generated by machines intended for other machines, things inside your ERP program, the physical access control, not just to areas in an office, but to other places where people work on a little more physical gear. And this is the new one about MFA, right? There's a lot of multi-factor authentication, but we are years beyond the kind of way we used to do it with an RSA token, right? We get a lot more value out of it than we used to. So I guess what it comes down to, for as much good data as we have so much that we don't use. Okay, so I had some fun with the format on this, and I built it out to say, let's take a traditional use of data in QRadar and a little bit in Resilient, right? And let's take a non-traditional data source or a non-traditional data instance, and how can I give you new value from the existing tools, from things you already have going on? I talk to my team a lot, right? The guys that are out doing this, 60-some guys that do QRadar and Resilient across the US, and most of these examples came from working with them. So let's talk about machine data first. Industrial controllers are things that build cars or take oil out of the ground, make silicon chips, bake coffee, right? The big machines that have intelligence of their own at this point. And a lot of customers that what we call industrial here at IBM use this kind of thing. Some of them are fully unattended. Some have people at them every day. There's medical devices. And by this, at least in this particular case, I don't mean heart pressure and blood monitors. Although there is good uses for that, we're looking at more environmental medical devices. I mentioned COVID-19 at the opening here. We're kind of becoming more and more aware here in Q1 2020 of environmental medical circumstances, like our current ongoing plague, but some other things as well. And the last is power systems. So what we're looking at with that is not the things owned by the city, but that big backup generator you have, or that second line, and how we can use this data of these big industrial gear, this machine-to-machine data, how we can use this to make your QRadar better, to make your security better. Okay, so let's take a look at industrial controllers. If I take a user data in a reference set, right, and I have users that are allowed to use the big industrial gear, the rubber mixer, the fractal distillation guns, the fender painters, right? So I have those users I put in a reference set in QRadar, and I have the start time of production gear it's starting, so that if I have production gear that is starting and someone that's not authorized to use it, if there isn't someone authorized to use it right there, this is a problem, and you should check that out. And maybe someone didn't log in properly, but maybe you've got someone using $1 million piece of equipment that should not be using it. Okay, so let's look at medical devices, right? So we can take user geolocation, and we've been recording this for ages in QRadar, right? I can tell where someone is working from with a pretty high level of fidelity. And we take environmental or epidemic alerts, right? So this could be cities where the air quality has gotten so low you don't want your people working there. Or this can be things like our current circumstance where you want everybody working from home, not in the office. So we can use QRadar to correlate these facts to say, man, who is working in an unsafe area? Where do I have people working that they shouldn't be working? This is generally a good-hearted thing, right? Something people do because they're trying to be good, but they're putting themselves at risk. And, you know, you don't want to put your good people at risk. Okay, power systems. So if we go and we look at production floor data, and you could be making greeting cards, you could be making barrels of oil, it doesn't matter to me. I get up-down data from a failover system, from a backup generator, from any of these things. I want to start a stateful shutdown, right? So rather than lose a batch of car fenders or greeting cards or whatever when the power system fails, or depend on a big scary alert going on the factory floor, we use Resilient or a tool like it to start a stateful shutdown so that the gear shuts down without hurting people and without losing any of your production. That was one of the one that struck me as fun, right? So many of these big power supplies now, you can shut down remotely via a playbook from Resilient, so that if you have something going on that shouldn't be going on, you send a shutdown command and you go in and you investigate. Okay, so let's talk about stuff coming from the HR database. This is one of those big brother things that scares a lot of people. I don't want to do anything that is kind of looking over people's shoulders to make sure they're working all the time or anything like that, because that doesn't make your environment safer. That's kind of environment Nazism. We're trying not to get into that, right? But if I take a look at who is logged in a given area, maybe I'm running a dentist office or an emergency room. Maybe we're back to the prior example where I was talking about that I have people that need a given level of education or licensing to be in an area to say, for the skills and certifications, right? To see when I have an underqualified or an understaffed team. Okay, so I know some folks in the medical field that are forever struggling to have enough people to staff their ambulances, to staff their emergency rooms. And that if you have a log that will pop up and say, man, I've got 4 nurses and no doctors that have logged in, this is a problem, right? So that you can, from the point of view of QRadar and pipe it over to Resilient, you have a playbook that says, I have a security problem that isn't solved at the network level, it's solved at the people level, and I need you to send out a communication on this right bloody now. Okay, so physical access to facilities. A lot of places, and I want you to think about retail stores now, a lot of people have people counters on the door, and they will log every time a person goes in or out. I then take the hours of operation of that store or restaurant or whatever the heck it is, and I take that data, and I correlate it so that I can tell you when I know areas are used during off hours. So maybe my facility is open from 9 to 5, and I still have a bunch of people in there between 5 and 6, and this is an operational thing. Maybe I should be open longer. But if I have people that are showing up 2 hours or an hour before things are open, this is likely a security problem, just not a data security problem. You've got physical things going on that you really need to know about. Okay, quality of remote login. This is my new favorite one. Multi-factor authentication has gotten really, really good. IBM makes something called Trusteer, but there's a number of other things as well, so that I can tell you how stressed out a user is during a login, right? So I can tell you if someone is under duress, and if they come in and they try and get privileged access. And, there's places that we get drive-by kidnappings, right? There's places where they put you in the back of what you thought was an Uber, and they beat you up until you go and max out your ATM card, or they beat you up until you log in at work, right? And it's a terrible thing, and it does happen. So if I see someone is really stressed out trying to log in, maybe I want to put an additional security check in there, either to make them call the security desk, just to be sure, right? And this is another place we'd use Resilient to achieve these ends. Or maybe I want to make an additional level of login to go back to their device, something like that. Along the same lines, right, as the stress level is the confidence of the login, right? We can tell, and this is one of those things that blew me away when I learned it. It is functionally impossible to duplicate somebody's swiping pattern or mousing pattern past a certain level of confidence. So if I have someone who's logging in and I don't really think, I'm not sure, it was good enough to log in, but it really didn't seem like them. And maybe Jerry hit his hand with a hammer today and he's mousing a little funny, something like that. But we can use this and run essentially the same equation to raise the level of scrutiny, right? So we can use these really cool multi-factor authentication systems to raise the level of scrutiny. I read recently, and I believe this was a Forbes article, that said 99% of data intrusions are places where there was not multi-factor authentication. If you want to lower your instances, if you want to lower your likelihoods of getting a data intrusion, this will go a long way towards doing it. Okay, so you come right down to it, right? And the message here is, we have a lot of great data sources. They've been helping us for years. They help us right now. And we also have a lot that we have barely scratched the surface on, okay? And there's more. There's others. Let me know if you come up with any fun use cases for this or other ways to use this data. But I am Mike Winkler, and this has been QRadar.